Well, it was when I was having a shave. Figaro.
Okay, serious now. The first question, how did traffic come about?
Basically, it all came about in a club in Birmingham called the Elbow Room. It was a really great nightclub. You don't get clubs like that so much anymore. It was a genuine nightclub, you know, where they played fantastic records. There was always a live band 3 or 4 nights a week, including visiting American jazz people. I saw Jimmy Witherspoon and people like that there. Annie Ross came up one night. And we used to play there. We were the resident band. And Birmingham was Steve Winwood's hometown, and I lived nearby, about 30 miles away. And Steve was doing great at that time with Spencer Davis. They had a lot of hits. And he used to come and listen to us play at the Elbow. And I think, basically, what happened was that we very early on got into what you would sort of say was acid rock. And a lot of the bands were still doing R&B, which was very big at the time. Everyone was in the Beatles, the Stones, everybody was influenced by the American R&B, which everybody was, you know. But then the West Coast was starting to begin. But I had a friend who'd gone to America. His parents were well off, because anybody who went to America then had to be, you know. And I kind of picked up very early on the West Coast thing, before it had really commercially hit England, you know. And I'd started writing songs with a couple of the guys in the band. The one guy who later went on to play with a group called Family, Polly Palmer. He now works with Boz Burrell from Bad Company. He played Vibes. And I was actually the singer in the band. It was called Deep Feeling. And when Polly would play the vibes, the vibraphones, he also played flute, which in a way is a sort of a forerunner of Traffic, what we were doing actually, in a kind of a way, because Chris Wood joined Traffic later and played flute. But we were writing very progressive. It wasn't just straight R&B. I think Steve was very attracted to the progressive side of the band, you know. And he used to come and, basically, used to come and jam with us. And being quite a name at the time, which he was, and we were just an unknown band building up a following, you know, playing around London, Birmingham, and the North. And through that sort of resident thing at the club, and him coming regularly, and Dave Mason was always hanging around in the wings somewhere, and Chris Wood also lived near Birmingham. It's a funny connection. Chris's sister, Chris Wood's sister, used to design clothes. And there was a big pop art movement where people used to wear these very wide ties. And she used to make those, Stephanie Wood. She's a designer. She's doing a lot of work right now. She does a lot of stuff for the States. And she used to design those ties for Steve. And Chris was at the art college in Birmingham. And they all got connected, and we all used to hang out at this club in Birmingham. And that's how it started. It really came naturally from, you know, being together and playing and jamming, and it just became a lot more involved. And in the end, we just said, well, why don't we just get together and make a band? And I had the name Traffic, because I used to come up with these crazy names all the time, you know. I always did, I don't know why, it was just part of, you know, what I did. And that was it. I said, okay, it's Traffic is a good name. And then you know what happened? A very strange thing happened. Basically, this would be more probably interesting for people this side of the ocean, but Status Quo actually were going for the same name at the same time. And there was a sort of a legal wrangle over the name, and we won out, and they changed it to Status Quo. Folks, how about that? We weren't. That was the name we went in on. That was the first name. The band I was in at the time was called Deep Feeling, but that was the name I had. Didn't know that someone else had also claimed they had the name earlier than we did, but they lost out, you know. Thank God. Imagine having a band called Traffic making music like that. Sorry, no offense, status quo. The Wanderer. Dion, like it, you know.
What songs do you feel show Traffic at your best?
Dear Mr. Fantasy, I think was a classic. You know, you only write so many that are really classics. I think that you can revisit from in the future, and the song still holds up, you know, it still carries something to other people that would listen or maybe go and find the record. Dear Mr. Fantasy was definitely one. There's something about it that was just, you know, special. And there were lots of other, you know, tracks along with it, like 40,000 Headmen and The Low Spark of High Heel Boys. That was our biggest selling record. And the rest were I think the thing about Traffic was that I can tell you for a fact that we never ever spiced anything up, you know, overdubbed and mixed and put it through 10 different machines backwards, and then, you know, and then worked for 6 weeks on the snare drum and got we just played, you know. We played exactly what you hear on the record. We may have overdubbed a vocal or two, some backing vocals, but it was the creative force or the feeling of the band that we just played. And what we did is what we did, and great that it was successful and people liked it, you know, but we didn't say, right, how can we make this record sound like it's part of, you know, the market and it's going to be good on the radio. We really were, at that time, technology was advancing, and there were a lot of bands doing a lot of, you know, extra things to get sounds, but right to the end, in late 74, 75, which isn't long ago, that was well into the glitter period, you know. Traffic was still, the very last album was exactly as we played it in the studio live, you know, with the minimum amount of tarting it up, you know. And I think people liked that about Traffic. I think that was one of the things. I always felt Traffic paved the way for a lot of jazz rock bands that came after. A lot of people like Yes, Genesis, Chick Corea. You know, I think a lot of those bands in that area were always striving for the simplicity of Traffic while maintaining that credibility of being not just a, you know, simple rock band, you know, a bit more involved musically, you know. Which obviously they were very technically brilliant bands, but I always felt they missed the point by being so technically brilliant that the simplicity was lost in the end. I think Traffic had a blend of rock, jazz, blues, folk, funk. You know, we really, because we had so many influences, you know, there was so much input into from the different, you know, characters in the band.
Great. How did the lyrics from Mr. Fantasy come about?
Well, I took this very funny substance. No, we had a very strange day, actually, and at the cottage, we all lived in this cottage in the country. We were the first band to go there and get it together. And it became famous, you know, and all kinds of people came out, you know, Ginger Baker, Denny Lane, Stephen Stills, Hendrix, loads of people in this little Berkshire cottage. And we built the stage in front of the house, which was a place where you're supposed to park the cars, because there was nowhere to park. And we would turn it into a stage and plug in the cottage and speakers out there and play to the hillside, you know, and it was incredible. Great jams we had there. And one day we were visited by a couple of friends from Birmingham, and we had a very strange day. And I was doodling on a bit of paper, and I drew this character, you know, with this weird thing, and he was playing a guitar with hands on the end of puppet strings, not playing it, you know. He was playing the guitar with these sort of puppet hands. And I was just doodling away, and it was a letter. you know, dear Mr. Fantasy, play us a tune, something to, and it was a little letter to this character. And it wasn't a conscious lyricist's effort at writing a lyric for a song. I was just, and Steve and Chris picked it up as I was the only one that was sort of producing lyrics, or so they must have thought, okay, well, what's that Jim wrote, you know, because we all lived together, you know, and it was very nice. I crashed and went to sleep at night, and I heard things going on, and I woke up a bit later, and they said, listen to this this tune that we got together with this thing that, you know, we saw a thing you'd written, and they played it, and I said, that's great. I couldn't wait. We played it instantly, and then worked it out better, you know, and got into the studio. But that was really sweet because it came about so naturally, you know. And I think it was a real definitive Traffic, you know, piece.
As a composer of lyrics, what inspirations have you drawn from?
Oh. You mean musically, other, or? Musically. Writers, I guess, in the very early days, I don't know, I guess blues, you know, black music, probably, to begin with. And then Dylan became the all-encompassing force, you know, which it still is, you know. And Lennon, I thought Lennon was a great writer. And then I used to read people like Dylan Thomas. And I like reading different poets. E. Cummings was a good poet. I liked written words and things that had strength when you read them, you know. But I think inspiration comes a lot from your own experience. You know, things that you do, people that you meet, things that happen to you, situations that you've been in. They're all very good. I think lyrics, unless you're trying to write a song which is purely commercial lyric, you know, boy meets girl, blah, 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 or something. If you write something that's more than that, you know, it usually comes from something you've lived through, you know. Inspiration, I think, comes from having lived and in a way putting yourself in situations that aren't just everyday nothing. Things have got to happen to you, you know. And I think through the 60s and through, I think it was one of the most intense periods of any young generation that will ever be. You know what I mean? I mean, even though young kids now, you know, it must be pretty tough. Because I think the world has moved into a sort of chaotic, really chaotic, and it's getting more chaotic, you know. And it must be pretty depressing, having half felt that most things have already been done and happened. The world has shrunk, you know. There's not so much mystery anymore. You're out of school, you got no job, you know what I mean? It's pretty grim, you know. It didn't seem so grim when I mean, there was plenty of work when I was out of school. Life did have some sort of challenges and journeys to be made, you know. It seems to be now, unless you've got a hell of amount of energy and imagination, you've got to fight off even more, you know, stronger sort of social things. But then, you know, it was very intense, incredibly intense period. And I think everyone was writing and creating, you know, it was a strong...
Were there any other times when you actually thought up lyrics under strange circumstances?
Yeah, when I wrote 40,000 Headmen. That was a strange... I was all alone, actually. And I was completely, you know, it was a sort of a thing where you get into something and you're not conscious of, you know, you really get locked into something and you get really carried away. That was a song that I was all alone. It was down at the cottage late one night. And that was a real kind of bizarre journey, you know, mentally, you know. That was quite, but mostly I used to write on trains or traveling. I used to write a lot driving in the car. When you're driving, because you're occupied and there's movement and there's some sort of subconscious thing going on, You can really think, or waking up from sleep. Paper Sun, our first hit single, I wrote up north in a little boarding house. And I woke up, I wrote it in the half awake state. And it was 4:30 in the morning, and I woke Steve up. I said, I finished it. I got it. I got all the rest of the lyrics. Because when you're asleep, you can remember each verse. And you don't have to write it down because you're in such a concentrated state. It stays there. And I wrote about 4 verses without forgetting it. And then wrote it down. And he woke up at about 4 in the morning. He went to the front room. It was this little Manchester place in Manchester. All the bands used to stay. And he got on this little piano in the front room, and we wrote the song at about 4:30 in the morning. That was good. 3 or 4 nights a week, including visiting American jazz people. I saw Jimmy Witherspoon and people like that there. Annie Ross came up one night. And we used to play there. We were the resident band. And Birmingham was Steve Winwood's hometown, and I lived nearby, about 30 miles away. And Steve was doing great at that time with Spencer Davis. They had a lot of hits. And he used to come and listen to us play at the Elbow. And I think, basically, I think what happened was that we very early on got into what you would sort of say was acid rock. And a lot of the bands were still doing R&B, which was very big at the time. Well, it was when I was having a shave. Figaro.
Okay, serious now. The first question, how did Traffic come about?
Basically, it all came about in a club in Birmingham called the Elbow Room. It was a really great nightclub. You don't get clubs like that so much anymore. It was a genuine nightclub, you know, where they played fantastic records. There was always a live band.